Our first speaker, Jim Towey, his bio's in there, you can read it. Jim's been a great friend of ours for many years now, and we're humbled to be able to invite him back here. And what's interesting is when Jim first spoke to us, he was lawyer to Mother Teresa, now Saint Teresa. And I think one of the things that impressed me the most is that at the canonization, out of all the millions and millions and millions of people who know and love Saint Teresa, Jim was asked to do a reading at the canonization in Rome. So brothers, please give Mr. Jim Towey a great big Man Up Philly round of applause. Jim. You want this or no?
Wow. Thank you very much, Hughes, for the very kind introduction. I know that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for his leadership and the band of people that he brought together to start this. And I also want to start by recognizing here today the priests that are among us that give their lives for us. If our priests, we just want to thank you. God bless you for your leadership in our lives. Well, it's great to be back at ManUp Philly. As you've probably figured out by now, I'm the warm-up act for your conference. So, I mean, you've got real men's men here. I'm hearing a little echo here. I'm going to spread that out. You've got, first of all, former Eagles All-Pro linebacker Seth Joyner, all 6'2", 245 pounds of him. Get this, in one NFL game, he had 8 solo tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 2 sacks, and he was playing with 102-degree fever. That's the kind of man Seth Joyner is. And who else is on the program? You've got 2-time Stanley Cup champion Don Selesky, a 6'3" bruiser, who tallied a couple hundred penalty minutes one season as part of the legendary Broad Street Bullies. He's as tough as they come. So, who does Eustace pick to fit right in with these guys? Yeah, a 5'8" bald guy with a high-pitched voice. That's gonna work, Eustace. So, I want to start the conference off with the traditional cry, "Man up, Philly!" Hey, I'm not afraid of those guys, Selesky and Joyner. They want to take a run at me, I'll hit them with my purse. But you do have a great program today. Of course, we already heard the beautiful voice of Mark Forrest, the Irish tenor who's going to be leading after me, the Adoration. Marty Rotella sang earlier, and of course, Brian Gall, the CEO turned author and really a prophet, who will be speaking later. And then, of course, the highlight of the day is the Mass with Archbishop Chaput. As you shared with you, and it's in the materials in the introduction, my day job these days is as president of a little university called Ave Maria University down in Southwest Florida. We're a new, oh great, people have heard of it, good. We've got about 1,100 students from 46 states, 20 countries, and it was founded by Tom Monahan, who founded Domino's Pizza and was the former owner of the Tigers, and we've been out there. So if you ever get down to sunny Florida, come see our campus. Now, I know that Ave Maria is not the best-known Catholic university in America. That would be the University of Notre Dame. Any Notre Damers here, any Domers? A few hands going up, good. Actually, Ave Maria and Notre Dame have a lot in common. We're both named after Our Lady. Our school colors are blue and gold, and neither of our football teams won the national championship last year. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to reveal that I have a son, Max, who is a senior at Notre Dame this year. He's at Notre Dame because he couldn't get into Ave Maria. he's not that smart. This is true, actually. It's one of the things you can do if you're president. He didn't apply to Ave Maria. I sent him a 3-page rejection letter anyway. But he's had a good experience at Notre Dame. It's been great. Yeah, tuition there this year is $66,400, tuition fees, room and board. But my friend, the president there, Father John Jenkins, makes it easy for me. I can direct deposit my paycheck straight into Notre Dame's account, so it works out great. That's all my Notre Dame material. But in all seriousness, I'm grateful to be included on this program with my friend Hughes, who's a man of God, a friend of God, and someone I admire. It's just great that we're here together, because when men gather before God, regardless of where we are in our spiritual journey, the Lord's present. The Lord's in our midst. This conference is about relationship. Relationship with Jesus Christ, the living true God. Relationship with our wives, kids, grandkids, and the relationship we have with each other. It's about coming together as men made in God's image and likeness and discovering our common bonds, these bonds that unite us. And each of us has a story to tell. And Hughes asked me to tell you a little bit of my own. So here goes. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, in a family of 7. My twin sister and I were at the end of the pack. My Irish father and my French mother were quite the unlikely pair. They became pen pals. They were introduced to each other during World War II when he was a Navy Seabee in the Solomon Islands. When they got married right after the war ended, they barely knew each other. And I loved my parents both very much, and they're home with God now. My mom came from a small family, and my dad was one of 11 kids. He had a tough upbringing and lost his father early on, and he started drinking at age 8 when his dad died. And he kept that habit his whole life, God love him. My parents' marriage reminded me of the joke about the guy speeding at 3 a.m. who gets pulled over by a police officer who says, "Hey, why are you in such a hurry at this hour of the morning?" And the guy says, "Well, officer, you'll be happy to know that I'm going to a lecture on the dangers of excessive drinking." And the cop says, "Where in the world is there a lecture like this at this hour?" And he said, "In my house." So let's say there were some arguments in the home growing up, and by the time I was around 9, my parents separated, which is what Catholics did back then when their marriages weren't working out. And when I was in high school, they finally divorced. At that point, my mom raised us, and she made sure I went to Mass on Sunday, and she got a job to keep us in Catholic schools. So I grew up Catholic, like all Catholics my age. I was catechized, but I wasn't evangelized. And by that I mean, I knew my faith, but I didn't know there was such a thing as a relationship with Jesus, and frankly, I wouldn't have been interested had I known it. So I went off to college. I was still going to Mass every Sunday, but now I was going to Mass for a different reason. I wasn't going to meet Jesus in the Eucharist. I was going there to try to meet girls. And as you probably guessed, that didn't work out too well. The girls those days, they were looking for tall, dark, and handsome, not short, bald, and scrawny. So I pretty much struck out regularly. But people would see me at church and they'd say, "Oh, isn't he religious?" But I wasn't. It was pretty much an act. I was going to Mass, I was present there, I was punching the card. I was diversifying my personality portfolio so that I was this, I was that, and I also would go to Mass. I graduated from Florida State University, passed the bar exam, and landed a job in Washington, working for a U.S. senator. I had money now, I'd never had that in my life, but my life was pretty empty. Pascal described sin as licking the earth, and I had licked the earth. I knew the taste of sin, and quite frankly, the only reason I didn't commit worse sins was the Lord seemed to preserve me from it. I was sure looking for trouble. I wasn't very good at finding trouble. And then lightning kind of struck my life, and the Lord seemed to want my full attention. A close buddy of mine, I was actually best man in his wedding, went into a downward spiral. He lost his wife, he lost his job, and then he lost his senses. He took his own life. He jumped headfirst off an overpass into traffic on I-95 in Lantana, Florida. I cried for days. I felt remorse and guilt and anger. Just months before, he had been staying with me in Washington, and I had spoken with him just a couple days before, and now he was dead. And I asked myself, why didn't I do more to help him? Why wasn't I there for him? Why wasn't God there for him? I found myself questioning everything about my Catholic faith. And I was so comfortable in my own hypocrisy. And the great thing about being a hypocrite is that you can spot hypocrisy really easily. So I was perched very comfortably on my judgment seat, pointing out all the religious phonies that I'd met on Capitol Hill or that I saw in the church and everywhere. And this went on for some time, and it was great because it got me off the hook for any responsibility for my faith. But while I was a fake Catholic, there was this one figure out there in the world that I saw from afar that seemed real. She seemed like she was living the gospel. This was this tiny nun in Calcutta, Mother Teresa. She seemed to be what a Christian was meant to be. So I wanted to meet her. And a few months passed, and then my opportunity came. The senator I worked for sent me on an overseas trip because he had oversight of U.S. refugee resettlement programs in Southeast Asia. And so I thought to myself, why don't I swing through Calcutta on the way back to America and meet Mother Teresa? I thought it'd be cool. And my job gave me entree with people who could arrange this meeting, but there was one problem with my plan. I didn't want to be around poor people. And Calcutta in 1985 until today is teeming with poor people, millions of them. So I had a problem. I didn't like to be around poor people because they made me uncomfortable. They made demands on me. They made me feel guilty. And I couldn't fix their lives. So why would I want to be around them? So this is the bargain I struck with myself. I said, okay, I'll go to Calcutta. I'll go there for the one day to meet Mother Teresa. And then on the way back to the United States, I'm going to stop in Hawaii for 5 days. So that was my plan, and that's what I did. And on August 20th, 1985, after I'd arrived in Calcutta, I went into the Mother House of the Missionaries of Charity. And I went to the Mass there. The chapel was packed with sisters. And back in the middle of the chapel on the left, there was this tiny Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And I didn't know how to then go and meet her, waited till the Mass was over, and I was just still sitting in the chapel when she came back in. And she came back in and was doing the Stations of the Cross. And I remember seeing her stop in front of the statue of the Blessed Mother at the end. Just the two of them alone. And then she walked away. So then I followed after her and I saw a sister, and I was then introduced to her. She came out through these curtains, this tiny woman about this tall, had these big hands. I met her the week she turned 75. She bounded out like a schoolgirl, had so much energy. She had so much focus. In a nutshell, she was everything I wasn't. She asked me if I'd been to her home for the dying. And I said, no, I hadn't. And she said, well, go by there and see Sister Luke. I thought, okay, I'd be happy to do that. So we talked for a very brief period of time, and I said goodbye to her. And I had the rest of the day to kill. So I went to this home for the dying because I told Mother Teresa I'd do that. When I got to the home for the dying, I walk in there. I'm in my starched white shirt, had an embassy car out there. Walk in there, and I see just row after row of these men laying in cots. And I asked for Sister Luke. She comes out. And I said, hi, Sister Luke, I'm Jim Towey. I was with Mother Teresa this morning. I thought that was really cool to drop Mother Teresa's name. I said, I was with Mother Teresa this morning, and she's told me to come here. And Sister Luke said, great. Here's some cotton, and here's some solution, and go and clean that guy in bed 46 that has scabies. And I looked at her. I was like, oh, bed 46. Inside, I'm like, I'm here for the tour. I came here for a tour. You know, here are the dying men, here are the dying women. I give them a 20, I leave. I was busted. I had just arrived, so I couldn't say I have to leave. And because I was too proud to admit to her, because it was 100% pride, there wasn't the slightest good in me that wanted to go back to bed 46. But because I was too proud to admit to the nun, I didn't want to do this, I walked back to the bed. I proceed to sit down on bed 46, and I sit right on the guy's leg. So now I'm off to a great start. And this volunteer comes by that spoke English, and I said, hi, Sister Luke told me to come clean this guy. He's got scabies, she said. And he goes, yeah, that's right, he's got scabies. I said, I don't know what they are. He said, well, it's a red rash, and it grows. It's okay. I said, well, where are his scabies? And he said, they're right around his anus. I went, great. It's like, this day's getting better and better. So, cleaned this guy, fed a guy or two, till I felt like I could leave. I didn't hear any bells, no angelic chorus. I was very happy to leave Calcutta the next morning. But the problem was, when I got to Hawaii, I was as uncomfortable in Hawaii as I had been in Calcutta, because there the pineapples I saw were healthier than the people I had just seen on the streets there. They were watering the yard of my lovely hotel there with water, and I'd just seen people in struggles for water just to get enough to drink. And this contrast between these two places, a day apart, really tormented me. I mean, I was glad I wasn't in India, but I wasn't so happy that I was in Hawaii now. Because what kept coming back to me as I was looking out at the Pacific Ocean was that man in bed 46, that chance encounter with what Mother Teresa described as Jesus in his distressing disguise of the poor. And I came to realize in the years that followed that Jesus, in his kindness, in his mercy, was waiting there for me in that bed. And I came to realize over time that when I had touched that dying man, that the good Lord had touched me back. And this was a turning point in my life. Anyway, I returned to Washington. I kept my word to Mother and went and conveyed her greetings to her sisters who ran a soup kitchen in a home for unwed mothers. This was my first up-close exposure to America's poor. And what struck me was how different from the third world they were. When I would show up at the soup kitchen to work there, I'd see people coming in at 10 a.m. that were drunk. Some were mentally ill. All were broken in some way. So it was easy in Calcutta to see Jesus in his disguise of the poor, but in the angry people I saw come into the soup kitchen, in the mentally ill ones, it was quite difficult. I came to understand better how Mother meant that giving the bread of friendship, giving understanding love, was a sustenance and nourishment every bit as important as the food given to the poor in India. It was my good fortune that Mother was coming to the U.S. 2 months later for a United Nations gathering, and so I tracked her down. And so I then became more and more involved doing legal work for Mother Teresa as she was opening up homes for people with AIDS and bringing in her sisters from India. It was always a joke about Mother Teresa had a lawyer. You know, what kind of world do we live in when even she had to have a lawyer? But not many people know this. She liked to sue people. No, I'm kidding. If you open that soup kitchen, I'll sue you. Anyway, I quit my job within 2 years, and I went full-time and spent a year with Mother Teresa's priests in Mexico. She spent a good bit of time there in Mexico that year. And I was discerning whether to be a priest or not. Then I went back to the home for people with AIDS that she had opened in Washington that I was living in then as a volunteer. And that's where I met a volunteer who became my wife and the mother of my 5 children. So it turns out I wasn't called to the priesthood after all. Now, I've asked myself many times why I had the chance to meet Mother Teresa and to be able to work with her and travel. And because it really was like winning a lottery where you didn't even buy the ticket and you won the lottery. Because I know I didn't deserve it. I knew the person I was that day, the person I am today. I know that it was the pride that got me to go and to be involved with the Missionaries of Charity. And so I'm here by God's grace and by His mercy. This God who seeks out the lost, the hypocrite, the phony, like me. The God who is the friend of sinners that brought me to Mother. So if the Lord allowed me this friendship, I know that it was a friendship that's meant for others. And so I want to share with you 3 lessons that I observed, because if the Lord allowed me these observations, it was meant to be shared with others since I didn't deserve it. And I hope they encourage you, these lessons, on your journey, and that you increase your desire to know Jesus, the doctor, the good doctor who comes for sick people like us. So here are the lessons. 1, keep it real. 2, pray like your life depends on it. And 3, keep your eyes on the prize while you serve others. First, keep it real. When you think of Mother Teresa, you probably think of her heroic work with lepers, with the abandoned, with the poorest of the poor. And that makes sense. That's why she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and admired throughout the world. But I don't believe that's why she was canonized. I believe Mother Teresa became a saint by embracing her humanity and doing the little things of everyday life with Jesus by her side. Her sanctity was forged through her relationships with others, particularly the women she lived with. We Catholics, we tend to turn our saints into little plastic statues, and we adorn them with superhuman characteristics. You know the stories that how St. Teresa of Avila levitated in the chapel, and St. Catherine of Siena floated up the stairs, and the stigmata of Padre Pio, and so forth. And of course, all these extraordinary signs do point to the supernatural, to heaven, but that's not what made them saints. They became saints, I think, through their humanity and how they exercised their humanity and the choices they made. Mother Teresa was fully human. She was a woman. She was a mother. She loved life. She loved people. I don't know about you, I'm a little wary of religious folks who love God but don't love people. Mother loved life. She loved her sisters. When I would drive her different places in America, and we would arrive at her convents there, when she'd pull up in the driveway, the sisters would pour out of the convent. She'd get out of the car. She would greet each of the sisters, grab their face like this, connect with them, look them in their eye, and give them a blessing. She loved them. She missed them when she was away from them. Mother Teresa wrote poetry. She loved to sing. She had a sweet tooth. She loved chocolate. When we would travel, she'd pull out her bag, and out of her bag some candies and pass them out to the sisters that were traveling with her. She liked ice cream. She loved to laugh. I can remember so many times where I would drive her and I'd be outside of the cloister where the curtains were, and I'd be eating while they were all inside together, and I would hear the hum of Mother's low voice as she spoke to the sisters, and then I'd hear peals of laughter. Mother loved to joke with her sisters and to joke with others. She didn't take herself too seriously. She loved baseball. And in fact, she was a Phillies fan. You know, poorest of the poor. Okay, I threw that in. But here's the thing, and this is important for us men to understand, because if we turn them into statues, into supernatural beings that are made of a stuff different from us, we let ourselves off the hook. She was fully human. Mother could get angry. I mean, I saw her get angry a few times. She got mad at me one time, and she shot a look at me, and I darn near wet myself. You know, like a saint looks at you like that, oh, this is great. But she was human. She could be impatient. She could be stubborn. You shouldn't be surprised by this. When you study the Gospels and you look at St. Peter and his impetuousness, and you see some of his habits, and you see how John and James were referred to as sons of thunder that had anger issues. The thing that was great about Mother, who was impatient by nature, was that what she did was she would fight against these traits. She worked through her faults and shortcomings just like the rest of us. And as she aged like everybody else. As I said, I knew her the last 12 years of her life, saw her pretty regularly, watched her age. She had to take heart medicine. She had a lot of pain, particularly in her back. I would see her sometimes broken ribs. She had an abscessed tooth one time that she let go for weeks. She was no stranger to pain, but she would take pain medicine when it became unbearable. The sisters, even at the end of her life, would massage her back, give her these it was the only thing that could comfort her lower back pain. And when she was very sick, she loved company. She loved the sisters around her. What made her different, I think, was that whatever she faced in life, whatever personal shortcomings or adversities she knew, she depended on God. She kept it real. She knew she was weak and had her faults and had no illusions about herself. And so as she grew in holiness, it wasn't because of her efforts, although she was resolved and determined to do so. That was the choice she made. It was because she trusted in God. She trusted that God would do what she humanly could not do. She said that the more she trusted Jesus and needed Jesus, the more he could do. Men, do we live that way? We all have traits we don't like, right? Maybe we're impatient. Maybe we're quick to judge others. Maybe we're controlling. Maybe we can't apologize. Maybe we're prone to anger, or we're cold or lazy. You can go down the whole list of faults that are possible. That shouldn't surprise us. The issue is, what do we do about it? Do we retreat into this, well, that's just the way I am, frame of mind? Or do we resolve to put ourselves in the hands of God, to trust God, to do the heavy lifting, to trust the doctor to heal us? In my opinion, for Mother Teresa, the hardest work she faced was in community life. Jean Vanier said once, he said, if you want to think of yourself as a saint, live alone, right? And it's because when we're in community, people hit our hot buttons. We can try to rope off areas to have people not hit our hot buttons so we can have the illusions that we don't have places to grow, places to heal. And so whether it's our wives, our kids, our coworkers, when we're with other humans, we have to confront the fact that we do have shortcomings and limitations. They remind us we're not perfect yet. I've been married now 26 years. I have a wife that reminds me every day I'm not perfect yet. I've spent a great deal of my marriage trying to pick at the speck in her eye while I ignore the plank in my own eye. But she gets even with me. It's called menopause. Do you ever wonder why they never bring that up in pre-Cana? It's because no one would get married. Trust me. But I thank God for my wife and our life together. And my vocation's been an immersion in the areas where I need to grow. And my wife and children, the great gifts they are the means of sanctification. They're the treasures of my life. They challenge me to grow and help keep it real. They school me in the art of forgiveness. It's hard for me to apologize. They teach me that I need to. They teach me how to love and how to be loved. And this is, of course, God's plan. So if anyone here is struggling in marriage or in relationships at work, you aren't alone, and you don't have to go it alone. So how can we get the strength to grow? That brings me to Mother's second lesson. It's a shorter one, and it's on the importance of prayer, our need for prayer. Mother Teresa prayed, no duh. I asked her to teach me to pray once, and she said, the only way you can learn how to pray is to pray. Once I was flying with Mother on a little plane, and the weather wasn't good. It wasn't like yesterday. It was probably more like today, a windy day. We got up in this little plane. There were 3 sisters, Mother, a priest, Sandy McMurtry, who had arranged the plane, and myself. I don't know if you've ever been in a little plane when the weather's bad. We were going up. The plane was just getting tossed up and down. I mean, I was white knuckle. I looked over at Mother Teresa. She was looking out the window. She had her rosary in her hand. She was as calm and placid as if nothing was going on. And I looked at her like, well, I know you're ready, Mother. But then I actually thought about it. I thought, you know, if this plane goes down and we all die together, this is going to be great. I'm going to say to St. Peter, I'm with her. I'm with her. Table for 6 up front, right up there. But for Mother, prayer wasn't a matter of last resort. It was a matter of first resort. It was a priority in her life. She used to say that if you're too busy to pray, you're too busy. So ask ourselves, are we too busy to pray? I love John Paul II, who's now a saint with Mother in heaven. I love that thought of the two of them together in heaven. They were friends on earth. And my wife and I like John Paul II so much that we wanted to name a son after him. But that posed a problem because my last name's Towey, and that would have made him John Paul Towey. It's been a little weird. But when you think about John Paul the Great and Mother, as busy as they were, running worldwide with worldwide responsibilities, they found time to pray. They had the discipline to pray. Do we? Are we aware of God's presence in our life? That's what happens when we pray. Because the man who's conscious of God's presence lives a more virtuous life. It just happens. He's aware that God's with him and desiring to help him. And one area where men need help is in fighting the plague of pornography. That's just an impulse or a click away. I see this on our college campus. I'll tell you, men, it's terrible to see what's happening to our youth, how they get hooked into it early on at age 13, 14 on their little cell phones, and the damage that it's doing to their understanding of human sexuality. I've seen guys also ruin their marriages over porn. And without exception, those guys, as they grew into that habit, had stopped praying, either because they were ashamed of themselves or were hiding from God, and they were defiant and didn't care. But regardless, they had turned from God. And whenever we turn from God, we rebel. It's the creature turning away from the Creator, and we turn towards sin inevitably. So if there's anyone here with any addiction, drinking, gambling, porn, drugs, doesn't matter, don't resign yourself to it. With God's help, you can overcome it. You've got confession today, this great freedom, these priests that give their lives to us, to minister to us. We can start over. Because I will tell you, all of us who, as Pascal said, licked the earth, that all of us who've sinned, know that without God's grace, we're capable of worse things. We don't judge others. Mother said, when you judge others, you have no time to love them. And I think of Peter, St. Peter, and in John 21, we remember St. Peter a Holy Thursday night. After all the grandiose claims he had made, I will be with you, I'll never leave you, I'll be there for you, I'll never deny you. And then sure enough, he denies him, and Scripture said he wept bitterly. He wept bitterly. But what was beautiful in Luke's gospel is how it captured that Jesus looked at him. What I loved about St. Peter is that Peter looked at Jesus even after he had denied him. He had the courage to look to Jesus and to receive that merciful look. It wasn't an "I told you so, I knew you were going to fail me." So we see in John's Gospel 21 when he says, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" And Peter gets frustrated and he says, "Lord, you know everything about me. You know what I just did. You know what I'm capable of." But Peter said, "But you know I love you." And then Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." A beautiful reminder for us of our need for God, and the only way we can feed that need for God is through prayer. And I'll tell you, man, you can't go it alone. You've got to pray with other men. You've got to find time like this to be with other men who know your struggles and burdens. Back at Ave Maria, I have a brother in Christ, Michael Timmis. We have a holy hour every Monday at 8 a.m. together. I really am blessed by my friendship with him. He shares his struggles. They're beautiful family life. He's got 5 kids. They have a Down syndrome son that I've watched them just love into such beauty. But all the struggles of life. We get together. We go on an annual retreat. We need to pray with other men. And I'm sure that if you don't know where to go with that, today Eustace and his team can tell you because they know everybody. But don't try to go it alone. And finally, the third and last lesson for Mother is to keep your eyes on the prize. Because you have to know in life where you're headed. You have to keep your eyes on heaven. Mother Teresa knew something that was very simple, and she would say this, that she had come from God and that she was going home to God one day. And she had this compass, that awareness. It was a compass that directed her life. And no matter how much difficulty or darkness she faced, and she faced plenty, she even wrote in her letters she felt abandoned at times by God. That darkness never upset her awareness that she was going home to God one day. A quick story: when Mary was pregnant with our third, Mother was coming to Washington, and we were living in Florida, so we made a plan to leave the two beautiful children behind and to fly up to Washington so Mother could bless the baby, because we didn't know if we'd see her after the baby was born. We get up to Washington, we walk into the foyer, Mother sees Mary and she goes, "Oh, Mary, when are you due?" And she said, "Well, I'm due August 8th, but I think I'm going to be early," because we just had Joseph. And Mother said, "No, you're going to have that baby on my birthday." I said, "Mother, your birthday's August 26th, and if Mary's 18 days late, my life's going to be a living heck." To make a long story short, on the night of August 25th, Mary goes into labor. We look at each other like the angels are at work. We're going to have a little girl. We're going to name her Teresa. Midnight strikes. August 26th comes. 1:20 in the morning. Out comes the baby, just as Mother had said, predicted. And the doctor says, "Congratulations, you have a little boy." And Mary said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah, here's how we learn in med school. Here's how we learn this." But while Mary was still in the hospital, I got a call from Calcutta from Sister Priscilla, and she said, if you can get back here, you should come back. We're not sure Mother's going to make it." So Sandy McMurtry and my mom came over, and Mary said, "Take this photo of little Maximilian," as we named him. And so I flew to Calcutta. When I arrived there, the sisters met us at the airport, and they said, "We need to go straight to the hospital because Mother's back on oxygen." And so we went straight there. When I got there, there was a stir. We got up on the floor where she was, and there was this stir right around her room, and I thought, "Oh gosh, did she already pass?" And I got close. I said, "Is Mother okay?" And Sister said she had the oxygen mask on, but she was pointing up and just looking up like this, and the sisters were all looking up. Was she having a vision? What was she seeing? What was she pointing to? And Mother, seeing their confusion, she moved her oxygen mask and she said, "I'm going home. I'm going home to God." She had such a clear awareness of her orientation. She had eternity in mind. When I'd see her in her 80s, every time I saw her, I always thought it would be the last time I'd ever see her again. And she was extraordinary. And Mother had I'd say, "Mother, I'm praying for you." And she'd say, "I have my bags packed. I have my bags packed." Are we ready? Are we ready? Are our bags packed? I want to say something to you men who are older, in your 70s. You may think that your best years are behind you, your most important years are behind you. They're not. They weren't for Mother. They aren't for you. I saw how incredibly fruitful her last 12 years were with her sisters who watched her age. And that's because in the last season in life, that period may be the most evangelical of all. It might bring your children and grandchildren and those who are your friends closer to God. And here's why I say this. Those people are watching you. They want to know if you truly believe what the church teaches. Do you truly believe that's the real presence in the Eucharist? And when you get bad medical news for yourself or your spouse, they want to see how you react. They want to see how you care for maybe an ailing spouse, how you offer up your suffering, all the indignities of aging. They want to see your priorities. These can be the most fruitful and impactful years of your life, so don't waste them. So I close with one last story, which is actually the very last time I saw Mother Teresa. It was in June of 1997, 10 weeks before she died. She was coming to the United States to receive the Congressional Medal of Honor and or Medal of Freedom, and to then go to New York, and then on to Rome to see the Holy Father for the last time, and then back to India. And so Mary and I and the children loaded up the van, drove up, and followed her around Washington and then to New York. When I got with her in New York, in the Bronx on East 145th Street, we were up on the 3rd floor going over legal matters with her. At this point in her life, Mother was 87 years old, which in Calcutta years is like 110. She had had malaria dozens of times. She was now in a wheelchair, very feeble. And I was sitting there going over legal matters with her, trying to stretch out this time because I knew now for certain I would never see her again. And one sister came up behind Mother, put her hands on the wheelchair, which was to signal that my time was up. And I said, "Mother, before you go, Mary and the children are downstairs. And could they come up and get your blessing?" And before I could even finish the question, and I'll never forget this, Mother stood up from her wheelchair and looked excitedly out the window, and she said, "Where are the children? Where are the children?" And I've thought about that for a lot since then, that this is the fruit of a life lived for others. She had a childlike heart. She had a playfulness. She wanted to see the children. They came up, Mother gave them the blessing, and we were gone. And I think we need to hear that question in our own lives today. Where are the children? We had this reading from Ezekiel today about the shepherd, which it's an important passage, because I think today the characteristic trait of our times is that adults have put their own interests ahead of children and the childlike. And we see the wreckage of this philosophy and abortion and fatherless, motherless families and so forth. And Ezekiel reminds us in chapter 34 when he says, "Woe to the shepherds of Israel, you've been pasturing yourselves. Should not shepherds pasture sheep?" Jesus, the Good Shepherd, invites us to pasture the sheep, to care for the children and the childlike, to feed his sheep. No one at the end of their life ever says, "I wish I'd spend more time in the office." But I'll tell you what else no one ever says at the end of their life. They never say, "I wish I hadn't prayed so much in my life. I wish I hadn't gone to Mass so much. Wish I hadn't reached out to friends in need, visited shut-ins, forgiven people, loved others." Men, if we keep it real, if we pray like our lives depend on it, keep our eyes on heaven, choose to serve instead of be served, we will grow into the men God wants us to be, and we'll know the same joy Mother Teresa knew at the end of her life. We will have made our lives something beautiful for God. And so I leave you with the prayer that Mother Teresa used to pray to our Blessed Mother every day. Be ladies' men. Follow our Blessed Mother. Hold tight to her hand and pray this prayer that Mother Teresa prayed. Mary, Mother of Jesus, give us your heart so beautiful, so pure, so immaculate, your heart so filled with love and humility, that we might be able to receive Jesus in the bread of life and love him as you loved him and serve him in his disguise of the poor. Amen. Great being with you guys. Have a great day. God bless you.
Jim Towey.